Back before last spring, I did a lot of filming around the house, lots of experimenting with some cooking techniques, and one of the techniques that I was filming stood out, the Dakota fire pit. I had played around with a Dakota fire pit a couple of times before then for the last few years. Never really cooked on it, just kind of playing with the idea. I finally decided to actually put it into use and did quite a good bit of cooking and fire building and experimenting with the technique. And I want to share a little bit of what I found back then. Yeah, I want to start off with this little introduction here. Back when I had two legs, um, back when I was positive about, or at least neutral about the Dakota fire pit, I was very hopeful that this thing was going to be something I could use on the trail. Turns out not so much, but I've got 9 reasons.
Today we're doing something completely different. I'm going to show you how to build a Dakota fire pit using a couple of tools. You can use either one of these if you don't have the other. I've got this little poo trowel that I dig my cat holes with, and I'm going to dig most of it with my e-tool because I haven't used this thing in years. But entrenching tool, haven't used this since I escaped from Ruby Ridge through a series of tunnels that I dug. You didn't know there was a third man, did you? So a little bit of history on the fire pit. Apparently it was developed by the Native Indian tribes, Dakota, Lakota, plains hunters hunting buffalo. They needed a way to cook effectively and efficiently and not catch all the grasslands on fire while they were out cooking some of that delicious buffalo that they were hunting. So number one, it's a great way, a very efficient way to use your fuel. It's relatively smokeless, so your enemies and your prey might not be able to see you as well. So smokeless, and there's no exposed light source, flame, fire on top of the ground. It's all in the ground. So
I would say my number one objection to the Dakota fire pit method of cooking is the amount of time it takes to construct it. Unless you're making one in the sand, it takes an extraordinary amount of time to dig basically 2 holes and join them together. So basically you're digging one hole and then you're joining it almost at a perpendicular angle, some kind of angle like this, or you could make it like that. But it just takes a tremendous amount of effort to build a Dakota fire pit, number one. And I can hear the typing right now. If you don't like working when you're in the woods, why don't you just stay home? And if that is you, I hear you. I'm just not that guy. If you're one of those guys that likes building a log cabin in the woods on the weekend, and that's your thing, you like to build multiple log cabins as you move through the woods. If that's your thing, man, have at it. It's just not my thing. I like relaxing in the woods, and I usually move pretty frequently, and to have to build another fire pit every time I want to cook something, it just doesn't make any sense. The second biggest gripe is the tools you have to bring with you, the extra tools that you need to be able to dig a fire pit. I mean, I usually have my little potty trowel, but I used it, as you can see, I used it to help dig this hole, but it takes forever with something like this. Hell, it took forever with that damn e-tool, and I don't carry an e-tool. Did I mention roots? Roots. They're pretty much everywhere there's trees, so to be able to dig a hole anywhere near trees, especially ones with long running roots, yeah, you're going to have to get through those roots to be able to get through the soil. So if you want to build a Dakota fire pit in the sand, man, have at it. I think everybody should probably build one. Just don't count on it to cook your food. and especially don't count on it to if you're in a hurry. If you're there for a short period of time, um, just know what you're getting into. The other misconception that a lot of people have is that the big draw apparently for the Dakota Fire Pit is smoke. It's a smokeless fire, which it can be, but it's not always, and you have to be very careful. If you're trying to evade, if you're trying to be very stealthy, um, if everything goes to plan, if everything works, you can have a smokeless fire. It just takes a lot of work, and you have to be very careful and add your very dry fuel very slowly. And be very careful because it's not really smokeless if you don't know what you're doing. One of my biggest frustrations became pretty obvious when I tried to cook something for any length of time. Adding fuel, managing coals became just as frustrating as the firebox. And you may have seen the two videos I put out about the firebox. It's a box about the same size as the fire pit, um, and it's straight down. It's very hard to manage those coals in a container, and it became the same frustration that I had with the fire pit, managing those coals. Um, yeah, I guess you could just slowly add small sticks to the top of it, or whatever. But every time you add fuel, you run the risk of adding smoke, and it's just managing a fire down in a hole is very frustrating to me. It's not very relaxing. So yeah, that was a big negative for me. I think the biggest surprise was how difficult it was to cook on without bringing some kind of a platform to place a your cooking dishes on, without bringing something else to add to the fire pit. It became very difficult. And in addition, when you put a grill on top of there, you are occluding the management port for your fire. So either I should have had a much bigger fire or fire pit or fire hole or a way to manage the fire underneath the grill. It just became almost ridiculous trying to cook on the thing unless you had just a blazing fire and you're trying to boil something real quick. It's just a pain in the butt. It's very difficult to cook on. I think one of the most interesting objections I have to it is that I think it's kind of gimmicky. I think it's kind of a um, something out of the field manual, and I'm pretty sure this is out of an Army field manual, how to build one, how it's constructed, and all that. I think it's a bit of a gimmick. Something for the survivalist guys, something for especially the SERE guys, the survival, evade, resistance, escape. I can't remember what all SERE stands for, but it's for the survival nerds that want to want to do the survival LARPing in the woods. Nothing wrong with that. Enjoy yourself, have fun at it, build your skills. I think that's really important. But it's also one of those things where practice this thing. Go out there in the woods. If you doubt what I'm saying, go out there and practice in the woods, and try this versus a small top of the ground fire, and see if what I'm telling you is not the truth. I think it's a gimmick. I think it's a fun little thing that you can do on the weekends and you can practice. And I say it's a gimmick because, as far as I'm concerned, it's not very practical for the type of camping that I do. And I think if you're actually trying to evade, if that's part of your thing, and you haven't practiced this, you don't know how hard it is. And if you're evading, why are you cooking? Why are you cooking? If that's really what you're doing, why are you cooking? Um, if you're cooking, you're not really trying to be stealthy, as far as I'm concerned. Um, of course, you've got less smoke, potentially. You've got less light coming off the ground. Um, and if you're cooking at night, you're really not trying to be stealthy. Even if you had a hole in the ground that's not emitting a lot of light, you're still, I think you're being quite foolish. If you're trying to be stealthy and you're cooking at night, whatever you're doing, you're doing it wrong. So I think, for me at least, it just doesn't fit, because I think the longest I've ever camped somewhere is 2 weeks, and this is, that's pushing it. That's pushing it for, I'm going to spend an hour digging a hole, and and then the next morning I'm going to get up and move. Yeah, like I said, it's just not really practical, I don't think, for anybody that's on the move. And if you're moving, if you're trying to evade, if you're trying to escape, why are you cooking? Why are you building fires? Um, and that brings me to the last point that I've kind of mentioned already. It's not really stealthy. Um, it can be stealthier, rather than having a big bonfire where you're cooking up a pig. You can have a stealthier, smaller um, fire to cook on. But number one, why are you cooking if you're trying to evade? If you're trying to escape and evade, you just need to get your ass out of the territory, whatever that is. Unless you're trying to exist somewhere for a long length of time without being seen, and that's probably a different issue. I would suggest you still rethink your strategy. But if you're doing it like me, you're camping for the weekend. It's just not stealthy, and I'd just rather have something on top of the ground that's easier to manage. So, with all these things, I'm going to give the Dakota Fire Pit two thumbs down. And look, I don't want to. If you're a huge Dakota Fire Pit fan and you've been using it for years, you know, feel free to disagree with me. Tell me about all those pigs that you've roasted over the top of it. But I think anybody that's used it for any length of time and is going to be honest about it is going to say the same thing. It's just, yeah, it's probably not that practical. And yeah, I think from what I remember reading is that it evolved from Plains Indians, where it's very windy out there on the plains. It's hard to control a fire, and a lot of times the grasslands would wind up burning down. So they developed this technique um, to control their fire and maybe cook something over flame without burning up everything and losing all their fuel, which makes a lot of sense. But I'm not cooking much out on the plains, very rarely. And if I do, if I spend any length of time out there and I find some nice loamy sandy soil that I can dig into in less than 5 minutes, I might try it again. But I cooked enough on this fire pit to know that it's just not a good fit for me. And if you want to play it, if you want to play with this technique while you're out in the woods, don't let me stop you. Just don't think that you're going to be able to depend on something like this consistently, especially if you're on the move. If you're prepping and you like playing those games, feel free to play the games. But actually cook something on there. See how far you can get by cooking, and see what a pain in the ass it is trying to manage it. And I've got other things that actually work really well, and I'm going to share those with you too. If you guys like this, drop a comment below. If you disagree with me and you can be respectful, drop a comment. I would like to know where you think I'm wrong. And I would also like to know if I missed something, if you found something else that was very irritating or not practical using your Dakota Fire Pit. Leave me a comment. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. And since the smoke is kind of progressing here, inside a little bit. Yeah, I forgot I was shooting in 4K, so